In our last lesson, we talked about musical context and surprises, and in particular, how too much contrast between ideas can make the final result sound incoherent. In this lesson, I want to look at some of the ways to make surprises sound more convincing. Obviously, when the degree of contrast exceeds a certain limit, there's no way to make it acceptable, especially in cases where many very salient dimensions of the music all change at once, say tempo, register, orchestration, motives, and harmony all simultaneously. It becomes hard to make the result sound anything other than random. But even less extreme contrast can sometimes be hard to make coherent. This is where the composer's craft comes into play. Knowing a few techniques for making surprises seem intentional rather than just accidental can make a big difference. In this lesson, I want to describe a few of these techniques. I will take the examples from my own music, but of course I didn't invent these techniques. You will often see them in the standard repertoire. The first situation, where several contrasts often appear in succession with minimal transition, is at the very start of a large work. Here's the beginning of my second piano concerto. Bar 1 presents the first idea. Bars 3 and 4 present another idea. It is in fact a rhythmic augmentation of the second bar, but at first listening it sounds more different than similar, as the note values are doubled and the idea is now presented using wind timbres. Then a third idea comes in the following bars. There's a new accompaniment, now in the strings, and then the piano presents a long melodic idea, starting in measure 6. The piano's bass line is conjunct and descending in the opening bars, A in measure 1, G in measure 2 to 4, and F in measure 5. That creates some harmonic direction, but the voice leading in the other voices from measure 4 to 5 is not conjunct. The piano in measure 5 does echo what it did in the previous bar, but the overall impression is still one of relative novelty. The reason these three contrasts can appear in succession and not sound incoherent is simple. They appear right at the beginning of the piece. If the music continued like this, presenting strong contrasts every few bars, it would indeed become incoherent before long. Since now the continuation stays with the third idea, we have more stability and feel like we're settling in. And of course the other ideas will eventually come back and develop as well. So the beginning of a piece can, in a sense, pose some questions as a result of some surprises, to which the following music will eventually respond. Now another example, also from the first movement of the same piano concerto. Before measure 61, the piano was playing quietly, first with the strings, then with the woodwind as accompaniment. Then in measure 61, the tempo suddenly gets a lot faster, the note values speed up, the harmony changes, and the brass takes center stage. The highest note in measure 60, the A in the piano, does indeed lead to the high A sharp in the trumpet, and the E in the first oboe in measure 60 is conjunct with the highest F sharp in the violins, but the timbres are very different, so the effect is far from smooth. To understand why it works, here's another, less convincing version of the same music. Why is this not as good? Well, the voice leading top line is the same, A to A sharp, but I have removed the crescendo in measure 60. This makes the forte dynamic less prepared. Also, by removing the timpani, the trombones, and the string chords, we no longer feel like the new idea is triggered by their accent. This is an interesting psychological point. We find surprises more convincing when we feel like they have a perceptible cause, or I call the trigger here. Without these triggers, we tend to hear the new idea as more random. When multiple sounds happen together, especially short percussive sounds, it's hard not to feel like they have a common cause. A trigger like this is often used to make a surprise sound like it arrived at the right moment. Here's another example of a trigger. This is from the second movement of the same concerto. Here the contrast between the two ideas is even more extreme. The piano has been playing slowly, legato, and quietly with string accompaniment, and suddenly the trumpet comes in fast, loud, and in a higher register, and the strings disappear. The last G sharp in the piano does indeed lead to the A sharp in the trumpet, but it is in another octave, so the conjoint voice leading is not very salient. Here once again, the timpani act as a trigger. It seems like they set off the new, more energetic character. Now one last example, using climax as a turning point. This is the end of the last movement of my Fifth Symphony. This is the end of the whole symphony. This climax is the biggest one in the entire work. There's a diminuendo after the climactic accent, leading to the quiet coda, which starts meno mosso in measure 249. But the thematic material of the two passages is not at all similar. The climax was a very loud tutti, with a crescendo that culminated with the dramatic attack in measure 246. The coda, recalling the first movement, is very soft, just strings accompanying a piccolo solo. There are also triggers here, the glockenspiel and the timpani starting off the string chords and the harp setting off the piccolo solo. But another reason this extreme contrast makes musical sense is that after a major climax like this, one feels that one has gone as far as possible with the previous idea. So introducing something new at this point doesn't seem arbitrary. In other words, the climax acts as a kind of turning point in the music. Of course, in all these examples, there are certain things that do not change, like the overall rhythmic and harmonic context. There is always at least some logical voice leading connecting the two sections, using common tones or stepwise movement. But arriving quickly at a strong contrast without having it sound arbitrary is still a challenge. The techniques I've described here are a few practical ways to make these surprises sound more organic, more convincing.